say the open road can feel endless, but sometimes the darkness waiting along it isn't just night. Strange figures, unexplained sounds, and moments that make you question reality. Tonight, I'm sharing stories from people who faced the unimaginable while traveling alone or with friends and lived to tell the tale. Welcome back to Lost Shrine. Before we dive into these encounters, make sure you subscribe, hit like, and share with anyone who thinks they're brave enough. Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. I want to hear your experiences too. Now, let's step into the unknown. I took the back roads because the GPS promised I'd save 40 minutes, and because I'd been on the interstate too long to think straight. The mountains were already swallowing the last of the daylight when I turned off, and the trees leaned in close like they were trying to listen. I remember thinking the road felt older than the map showed it, patched and narrowed, the yellow lines worn down to pale scars. I was headed to a rented cabin I'd found cheap for the night, something to break up a drive that had started before sunrise and hadn't let up since. I told myself the quiet would help me stay awake. The first rest stop came not long after the turnoff, a gravel pullout with a picnic table and a metal trash can riddled with bullet holes. I stretched, drank warm coffee, and got back in. By the second rest stop, nothing more than a widened shoulder and a sign with the paint peeling off, I was fighting the familiar burn behind my eyes. That's when I noticed it. Not all at once, just a wrongness at the edge of things, like when a song skips but you're not sure if it's the speaker or your ears. Every time I checked my passenger side mirror, my reflection lagged. I'd tilt my head and the face in the glass would stay where it was for a heartbeat too long before following. I blamed fatigue. Night driving does strange things, especially when the forest closes in and the road keeps bending without warning. I rolled the window down to let cold air slap me awake. The smell of damp leaves and pine came rushing in, sharp enough to sting. I started watching my reflection more closely. When I blinked, my eyes closed and opened, but the reflection's eyes didn't. They stayed wide, catching the faint glow of the dash lights. I forced myself to laugh, a short, ugly sound that vanished into the dark. I told myself mirrors warp in the cold, that my brain was filling in gaps. Still, I turned the interior light on, flooding the cab with a sickly yellow glow. The mirror showed my face again, behaving itself, eyes moving when mine did. I shut the light off and kept going. The night felt crowded after that, not in a way I could point to, not like headlights behind me or shapes in the road. Just a pressure, like the air had thickened. The trees pressed closer. Every few miles, a dirt track split off into the woods, disappearing almost immediately, like paths meant for people who already knew where they led. I kept both hands on the wheel and focused on the ribbon of pavement ahead. When I hit the stoplight in the mountain town, it surprised me. One moment it was forest, the next it was a cluster of buildings huddled together as if for warmth. The town looked tired. Half the storefronts were boarded up, and the ones that weren't glowed dimly, like they were conserving energy. The light turned red, and I stopped. The engine ticked softly. Somewhere, a dog barked once and went quiet. That's when I turned fully toward the passenger seat. It was empty. No coat, no bag, just the seat, worn and faintly stained, the fabric dark where years of elbows and shoulders had pressed in. The seatbelt, though, was buckled. The latch clicked shut, the strap drawn tight across nothing. I reached out without thinking and touched the belt. It was warm, not sun warm or engine warm, but body warm, like someone had just unbuckled it and changed their mind. My hand hovered there, fingers tingling. I looked back at the mirror. My reflection was smiling, just a little. I snapped my eyes away and fumbled for the seatbelt latch, pressing the button hard enough to hurt. It didn't release. The light turned green, bathing the windshield in a dull wash. The truck idled across the intersection, its driver staring straight ahead, face pale in the glow of his dash. I pulled back onto the road with the belt still buckled and my heart pounding so hard it made my vision pulse. As I accelerated, I felt it, a shift barely perceptible, like the car settling when someone gets in. The suspension dipped on the passenger side. The steering wheel tugged. I corrected, knuckles white, and the car straightened. My breath came fast and shallow, fogging the windshield. I told myself it was uneven pavement, a bad alignment, anything. But every time I loosened my grip, the car drifted toward the shoulder. Not a hard swerve, just a gentle insistence, like a hand resting on the wheel, applying pressure. I locked my elbows and stared at the road. The trees blurred together. The radio hissed with static no matter how I tuned it. I didn't dare look over again. The sense of weight beside me grew more definite, pressing into the seat, warming the air. The smell changed too. Under the pine and damp earth, there was something sour, like old sweat and wet wool. I breathed through my mouth and counted mile markers until the numbers stopped meaning anything. The cabin turnoff came up fast, a narrow gravel drive marked by a leaning post with the rental company's name burned into it. I slowed too much and felt the wheel tug, correcting myself just in time to avoid ditching the car. The drive climbed steeply, the gravel popping under the tires. When I parked in front of the cabin, a simple log structure with a single light burning over the door, the weight lifted. It was sudden enough to make me gasp. The car rocked slightly as if someone had stood up. I sat there for a long minute, engine running, listening to my own heartbeat. The seatbelt was still buckled. I unlatched it this time without resistance. The belt snapped back into place, slapping against the pillar. The seat looked normal. Cool. Empty. I grabbed my bag and stumbled inside, locking the door behind me even though I knew how flimsy it was. Sleep came in fragments. Every sound outside made me jerk awake, convinced I'd hear footsteps on gravel or the scrape of fingers on wood. When dawn finally bled through the thin curtains, I felt hollowed out. I forced myself back to the car, keys shaking in my hand. The passenger seat looked wrong immediately. The foam was compressed in a way it hadn't been before, a deep impression where someone's weight had settled for hours. Pressed into the fabric were fingerprints, not smudges, but clear impressions, the tips of fingers sunk deep as if the foam had been clay. They were too large to be mine, the span wider than my hand, the pads flattened and broad. I touched them, and the foam sprang back slowly, reluctantly, like it didn't want to let go. I drove straight home after that, staying on main roads, never letting my eyes linger on the mirrors. Sometimes, late at night, when I catch my reflection in dark glass, I think it hesitates. I keep both hands on the wheel even now. Construction forced me off the highway just after dusk, the kind of detour you don't question because you're tired and the sign looks official enough. Orange barrels funneled me onto a narrow strip of pavement that cut straight into the trees. No lane markings, no reflectors, just black asphalt swallowing my headlights. The forest closed in immediately, branches knitting overhead until the sky vanished and the air felt thicker, like the woods were holding their breath. I remember thinking the road felt wrong under my tires. Too smooth, still warm, like it hadn't finished cooling yet. My phone lost signal within minutes. Not a flicker, just gone. I kept driving because that's what you do when there's nothing else to do. The radio picked up static and then a low hum, so I shut it off. The quiet pressed against the windows. After a while, I realized I hadn't passed a single driveway or mailbox. No side roads, no trash bins, not even a deer. The place felt unused, forgotten, yet the asphalt shone like it had been laid that morning. I cracked the window to smell it and caught that sharp, tarry scent, fresh and chemical, completely at odds with the old rot of the forest. An hour passed. At least it felt like an hour. And that's when I noticed the headlights ahead of me. Two pale dots far down the road, just visible through the tunnel of trees. I felt a wave of relief so strong it made my hands shake. Someone else was out here. I sped up a little, but the lights never got closer. They stayed the same distance no matter how fast I went. When I slowed, they didn't pull away. They just hovered there, steady and patient, like they were waiting. I flashed my brights once, a quick, friendly signal. The headlights ahead flickered back, just once, like acknowledgement. Not a warning, not a mistake, a reply. My stomach tightened. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe the road curved weird. Maybe the driver was matching my speed. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being measured. The trees grew denser, trunks packed so tight the woods looked stitched together. Every so often I thought I saw movement beyond the beam of my headlights, low and quick, but when I turned my head, there was nothing. No animals crossed the road. No insects hit the windshield. The silence was complete, the kind you only notice when your ears start to ring. The headlights ahead stayed exactly where they were, like they were nailed to the night. Then the road opened into a turnout on the right. It came out of nowhere, a wide gravel loop carved into the trees. I slowed despite myself. Dozens of cars sat neatly parked there, angled like a dealership lot. Sedans, pickups, an old minivan with a child's booster seat visible through the window. Every door was closed. No lights on. No people. As I rolled past, my headlights swept over windshields coated in a fine film of dust and pollen, undisturbed. I saw keys still hanging from ignitions. One car had a coffee cup in the holder, lid on, straw unbent, like someone had just stepped away. The hairs on my arms lifted. I didn't stop. Didn't even tap the brakes. My eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, and I swear I saw shapes between the cars, low and still, like crouched figures pressed into shadow. I told myself it was just my mind filling in gaps. That's when the headlights ahead went dark, not fading, not turning a corner. Just gone, as if someone had pinched them out with their fingers. I drove faster. The road stayed straight, relentless, the trees leaning in closer the farther I went. I felt watched, not in a dramatic way, but in the quiet, practical way you feel when someone is counting your steps. My car made small noises that suddenly sounded too loud, the hum of the engine, the whisper of tires. I kept expecting to see another turnout, another sign, anything. There was nothing. I told myself to keep going, that roads end eventually. They always do. I don't know how long it took before I saw the break in the trees, but when I did, it felt like surfacing from underwater. The canopy thinned and a pale strip of sky appeared ahead. The road widened, lines reappeared, reflectors caught my headlights and blinked back like sane little eyes. I burst out onto a two-lane state road and nearly laughed with relief. I didn't pull over. I didn't look back. I just kept driving until the fuel light came on and the woods gave way to a cluster of lit windows and a gas station humming like a sanctuary. Inside, the clerk was an older man with hands stained dark from years of work. He looked at me for a long moment before asking where I was coming from. I told him the highway number, the construction, the narrow road through the trees. His face changed in a way that made my stomach drop. Not fear exactly, but recognition mixed with something like pity. He shook his head slowly and said there wasn't any construction on that stretch tonight. I tried to show him my maps, but my phone still wouldn't load anything. He poured me a cup of burnt coffee and told me to sit. When I described the headlights and the parked cars, he sighed and rubbed his temples. He said that road doesn't show up because it's still active. Not maintained, not open, active. Like a wound that hasn't scarred over. He didn't like talking about it, but a few things came out anyway. Long ago, Families lived back in those woods. People who didn't want to be found. When the state cut a road through, some of them left their cars where the pavement ended and went deeper in, where engines couldn't follow. Others tried to leave and didn't make it. Cars stayed because nobody wanted to claim them. The road kept getting resurfaced, though no one could say by whom. Fresh asphalt appeared every few years, warm and black, like something was making sure the path stayed usable. I asked him about the headlights. He looked away and said, "Sometimes the road shows you someone ahead, so you'll keep moving. If you stop, you're deciding something without realizing it." I asked, "What happens if you stop?" He didn't answer. He just told me I did right by not pulling into that turnout, by not looking back. I slept in my car that night with the doors locked and the seat reclined, listening to trucks pass on a road that felt solid and agreed upon by the world. In the morning, my phone worked again. I tried to find the detour on the map. There was nothing there. Just a green blur of forest where I'd driven for hours. No thin line. No name. I told myself it was a glitch, exhaustion, fear playing tricks on me. Sometimes, late at night, I think about those cars parked so carefully, the keys waiting, the coffee cooling in its cup. I think about the headlights that answered me like they knew my language, and I think about how warm the road felt, like it was alive under my tires, patient and ready for the next person who believes the sign and turns where they're told. I was cutting through the mountains to save time, the kind of two-lane road that only exists for locals, logging trucks, and people dumb enough to trust an offline map. No cell service for miles. Trees leaned close on both sides, their branches knitting together overhead until the sky disappeared and everything turned the same bruised shade of gray. The radio was the only thing keeping the silence from pressing too hard on my ears, but even that faded in and out, dissolving into static every few seconds like it was being swallowed by the forest. I remember thinking how quiet it felt for a road that still had fresh tire marks and occasional reflectors. No houses, no lights, just the hum of my engine and that faint hiss from the speakers. When the static finally settled, I expected music. Instead, a calm, measured voice came through, the kind you hear on local weather stations. Neutral, professional, almost comforting. It started listing weather updates for towns I recognized from earlier in the drive. Places I'd passed through an hour ago. Rain chances. Wind advisories. Nothing strange about that, except it was giving exact temperatures, down to the degree, for places I knew didn't even have proper stations. I glanced at the clock on my dashboard out of habit. 9:40 p.m. The voice paused, then shifted tone slightly, like turning a page. It began listing traffic incidents, not warnings, not use caution, full descriptions. Single vehicle rollover on County Route 12 near a collapsed fence line. Driver trapped. Time of incident, 9:50 p.m. I slowed without realizing it, my foot easing off the gas. County Route 12 was behind me, but I'd passed a collapsed fence line not 10 minutes earlier. I told myself it was coincidence. Rural roads all look the same if you stare long enough. The static crept back in, then cleared. Another report followed. Different road, different town, same level of detail. Head-on collision involving a pickup and a deer, windshield breach. Time of incident, 9:52 p.m. I swallowed hard and checked the clock again. 9:42 p.m. Every timestamp was 10 minutes ahead. Exactly. Not rounded, not approximate. I turned the volume down a notch, like that might give me control. The forest seemed to lean closer the farther I drove, the road narrowing into a ribbon of black that refused to straighten out. My headlights caught flashes of movement deep between the trees. Just deer, I told myself, or branches shifting. But I kept seeing gaps where something could stand and watch without being seen. The voice continued, steady as ever. Another accident. Another exact location I could picture because I'd just been there. I started counting the minutes between reports. They came slower now, spaced out like the pauses were intentional, like it was waiting for me to catch up. I thought about turning the radio off. I really did. But the silence outside the car felt heavier than the static, and I was afraid that if I shut it down, I'd hear something else instead. Something tapping at the glass, or pacing me just beyond the tree line. When the next report came, it mentioned a road with no name, just the southern stretch past the old fire tower. My stomach dropped. I'd passed that tower 5 minutes ago. Rusted metal bones rising above the trees, half collapsed, surrounded by warning signs nobody bothered to replace anymore. The timestamp was 9:58 p.m. My dashboard read 9:48. My hands were sweating on the wheel now. I tried to rationalize it. Pre-recorded broadcasts, someone messing with a local frequency, a sick joke. But the descriptions were too precise. They mentioned skid marks, broken glass, even the direction the vehicles had been facing. Details you wouldn't have unless you were standing there, looking at the wreckage. The road dipped sharply, and my headlights caught a flicker of movement ahead, something low and fast crossing the asphalt. I braked hard, heart slamming, into my ribs, but there was nothing there when I stopped. Just leaves skittering across the road and the smell of damp earth seeping in through the vents. The radio crackled again. The voice sounded closer now, not louder, just more present, like it was leaning in. Single vehicle collision reported on the unnamed access road. Driver traveling alone, impact with roadside embankment. My breath caught. I was on an unnamed access road. I hadn't seen a sign in miles. The timestamp, 9:58 p.m. I checked the clock, 9:48 p.m. I told myself I'd pull over, wait it out, let the clock catch up. But the thought of stopping in that stretch of forest made my skin crawl. There were no shoulders, no clearings, just trees and darkness, and the sense that the woods were full of things that didn't belong to anyone anymore. The voice continued. Vehicle described as a dark-colored sedan. My car was dark blue, almost black in low light. My pulse thudded in my ears. Front-end damage, anticipated. I started shaking my head, whispering no like it could hear me, like it would care. I pressed harder on the gas, the engine whining in protest as the road twisted tighter. My headlights bounced, briefly illuminating something set back from the road, a structure half hidden by brush, a cabin, or what was left of one. The roof sagged inward and the windows were black holes. I thought I saw movement near the porch, but it was gone before I could focus. I told myself it was just my nerves, just shadows. The radio went silent for a long moment. No static, no voice, just a dead, empty channel. I almost laughed from relief. Then it came back. Driver is male, the voice said calmly. Vehicle registration indicates local rental. My chest felt too tight to breathe. I'd rented the car 2 days earlier. Color, dark blue. My fingers went numb, tingling like they'd fallen asleep. I wanted to throw the radio out the window. I wanted to stop the car and run. Logic be damned. License plate. I screamed then, a raw sound that surprised even me, and slammed my hand against the dashboard. The voice kept going, unbothered, reciting every character of my plate number without pause. Perfect. Exact, like it had been reading it off the bumper. The timestamp, 9:58 p.m. My clock flipped to 9:58. At that exact moment, the road curved sharply left, tighter than the others, and my headlights caught something standing in the middle of the lane. A person, too thin. Clothes hanging off them in tatters that looked older than they should have been. Their hair was matted, face turned slightly away, but I could see the outline of their jaw, sharp and wrong. I swerved on instinct, tires screaming as I overcorrected. The car clipped the embankment, rocks grinding under the chassis, and for a heartbeat I was sure this was it, that the voice had been right. I came to a stop sideways across the road. Engine stalling, headlights cutting off abruptly. Darkness rushed in, thick and absolute. The radio went dead. No static, no voice, just my own breathing, ragged and loud. I sat there for a long time, afraid to move, afraid to listen. Somewhere in the woods, something made a low sound. Not quite a voice, not quite an animal. It echoed once, then again, closer. I smelled smoke, faint but real, like a fire burning damp wood. I thought of the cabin I'd passed. I thought of people living out here long enough to forget how time was supposed to work. When I finally dared to turn the key again, the engine sputtered but caught. The headlights flickered back on, illuminating the empty road ahead. No person, no sign of anyone. Just deep gouges in the dirt where my tires had skidded, and a few feet from the bumper, a patch of disturbed leaves like someone had been standing there, waiting. I drove the rest of the way in silence, radio unplugged, eyes fixed straight ahead. I didn't slow down again until I hit the first real town and saw lights that belonged to people who knew what year it was. I reported nothing. Who would I even tell? Sometimes, late at night, when everything is quiet enough, my car radio will crackle on its own for just a second. I never hear the voice again. Just static. But I always check the clock anyway, counting 10 minutes ahead, wondering what it might still be waiting to announce. The clerk didn't look up when I stepped inside. The office smelled like old coffee and damp wood, the kind of smell that clings to places that never really dry out. A single bulb buzzed over the counter. I stood there a second, boots leaving wet half-moons on the warped floor, waiting for the question that never came. Instead, he slid a key across the counter, heavy brass, stamped with a number worn smooth by hands before mine. He didn't ask my name, didn't ask how long I'd be staying. Just pushed the ledger toward himself and made a mark I couldn't see. I should have said something. I remember thinking that exact thought and ignoring it. I was too tired to care. The road had chewed me up all day. Switchbacks, fog sinking into the hollows, trees pressing in so close they felt like they were leaning to listen. When I took the key, his fingers brushed mine. They were cold and dry, like bark. He finally looked up then, eyes pale and unfocused, as if he were staring through me at something behind my shoulder. "Room's warm," he said, voice flat. That was it. The room sat at the far end of the building, backed right up against the woods. The porch boards groaned under my weight, and something moved in the brush just beyond the railing. I told myself it was a raccoon. Inside, the air felt thick, like someone had just exhaled and never breathed back in. The lamp was on. The bedspread was thrown back, sheets tangled and darkened in places, still holding the shallow impression of a body. When I laid my palm on the mattress, it was warm. Not sun-warmed, body-warmed. The bathroom light glowed through the cracked door. Steam clung to the mirror, a handprint smeared in the fog, fingers long and uneven. The sink dripped. I stood there a long time listening to that drip and the low murmur of the forest beyond the thin wall. I told myself a story that made sense. Double-booked room, clock forgot, someone stepped out for a smoke. That kind of thing happens. It's rural. It's late. People don't follow rules out here. I slept anyway. I don't know why that feels like a confession now, but it does. I peeled off my jacket, left my boots on the floor and lay on top of the covers. The mattress dipped beneath me like it was remembering another weight. I lay there, listening to the sounds seep through the walls, the wind worrying the trees, something heavier pacing farther back, a rhythmic scrape that might have been branches or might not have been. At some point, I smelled smoke, faint and sweet, like green wood burning. I dreamed of footsteps on the porch that never quite reached the door. Morning light came thin and gray, filtered through fog. My mouth tasted like pennies. The sheets were cold now, but when I swung my legs off the bed, my boots were gone. In their place sat a pair I didn't recognize. Mud-caked, laces frayed, the leather chewed at the toes. I laughed, a sharp sound that felt wrong in the quiet. I told myself it was a prank, or that exhaustion was playing tricks on me. I washed my face. The mirror was clear. No handprint. I walked back to the office to sort it out. The clerk was there. Same place, same bulb buzzing overhead. He looked up as I approached, and for the first time there was something like curiosity in his face. "How long you been staying?" he asked. "Just last night," I said. "There's been some kind of mix-up. Someone else was in my room." He frowned and turned the ledger toward me. My name was written there in a careful hand I didn't recognize. 3 check marks sat beside it. Dates filled the margin. 3 nights ago, 2 nights ago, last night. My signature was at the bottom of the page, crooked but unmistakably mine. I felt the room tilt. "That's not possible," I said. "I got in late last night. You gave me the key." He studied me for a long moment, then shrugged. "You came in tired," he said. "Happens." I left without arguing. That's the part that still bothers me. The way my legs carried me back to the room like I'd already decided something. The forest seemed closer now, the trees crowding the gravel drive. On the porch, I noticed marks in the boards, long grooves like something heavy had been dragged across them. Inside the room, my jacket hung on the chair, damp and smelling faintly of smoke. There was dirt under my fingernails. I spent that day trying to leave. The car wouldn't turn over. No signal on my phone. The road I'd come in on disappeared into fog that didn't lift no matter how long I waited. I walked a little way into the trees, following what looked like an old footpath. It led to a clearing with a fire pit still warm, ashes stirred like someone had just stood up. There were scraps of food there, gnawed bones, and a shoe half buried in leaves. Not a match to mine. That night, the sounds came closer. Not animals. Voices, low and breathy, carrying on the damp air. I caught words now, then. Nothing that made sense, just shapes of speech. The porch boards creaked. The doorknob turned once, slow and testing, then stopped. I didn't sleep. I sat on the bed with my back against the wall, staring at the bathroom door, listening to the drip of the sink like a clock, counting down to something I couldn't see. In the early hours, I heard footsteps inside the room. Soft, bare. The mattress dipped at the edge, and the air shifted with the weight of someone sitting down. I could smell them then, wood smoke and damp earth, and something sour underneath. I kept my eyes shut. I told myself if I didn't look, it wouldn't be real. A hand brushed my arm, fingers long and calloused, tracing the faint scar there like it was following a map. Morning came again. I went back to the office. The clerk didn't ask me anything this time. He just slid the ledger closer and tapped the page. Another check mark had been added. 4 nights. I saw then that the pages before mine were full of names, all written in different hands, all with check marks that ran on longer than they should. Some names were crossed out hard enough to tear the paper. "People go missing out here," the clerk said, not looking at me. "Sometimes they stay." I packed what I could and tried the car again. It started on the first turn. The road was there now, clear as day. As I pulled away, I caught sight of movement in the trees, shapes that might have been people, might have been stumps, standing just close enough to watch. One of them lifted a hand. The fingers were long and uneven. I drove until the mountains flattened and the air dried out. I didn't stop until I hit a town with too many people and too much light. That was weeks ago. I still wake up some nights smelling smoke, my sheets tangled and warm. Sometimes I find dirt under my nails. Sometimes my boots aren't where I left them. And sometimes, when I close my eyes. I see a ledger filling up, check marks marching on, waiting for me to come back and finish what I apparently already started. I was cutting through the mountains to save time, following a state road that barely deserved the name. It wasn't one of those endless stretches people talk about, just a narrow ribbon of cracked asphalt hugging the hillside, dropping off into trees so thick they swallowed light. The sun was going down faster than I expected, sinking behind the ridgeline and turning the woods the color of old bruises. No cell service, no radio signal, just the hum of my tires and the sound of my own breathing. I slowed when I saw them. At first I thought it was a wreck or a roadside vigil, maybe a funeral procession pulled over. My foot hovered over the brake as my headlights swept across the shoulder. There were people kneeling in a line along the guardrails, spaced evenly like fence posts. Men, women, a few I couldn't quite place by age. All of them had their heads bowed and their hands clasped together tight at their chests. They were praying. At least, that's what it looked like. Their lips were moving, but I couldn't hear a sound through the closed windows. The way they moved was wrong, though. Too synchronized, every mouth forming the same shapes at the same time, like they were reciting something memorized down to the breath. I slowed more than I meant to. My headlights washed over their faces, dirty, pale, hollow-cheeked. None of them looked up as I passed. Not a flinch, not even when the engine noise echoed off the rock wall. Except one. He was near the middle of the line, kneeling closer to the road than the rest. He lifted his head slowly, like he was underwater, and looked straight at me through the windshield. His eyes caught the light and reflected it, bright and wet. Then he smiled. It wasn't wide or toothy. It was small, familiar, the kind of smile you give someone you know from somewhere but can't quite place, like he recognized me. I hit the gas without thinking. The road curved hard, trees closing in again, and they disappeared behind me. I told myself it was some backwoods church thing, a revival gone weird. People do strange things up there. That's what I told myself. Still, my hands were shaking on the wheel. A mile or so up the road, less probably, I pulled over at a turnout to calm down. The engine ticked as it cooled, and the forest pressed in from all sides. The air smelled like wet leaves and iron. When I stepped out, the silence felt heavy, like something leaning close. I noticed the guardrail first because of how new the marks looked. Fresh cuts in the metal, bright silver against rust. At first, I thought it was graffiti, kids carving initials. Then I saw my name. Not a nickname, not a mistake. My full name, carved deep and careful, letters straight and deliberate like someone took their time. Same spelling, same spacing I use when I sign paperwork. I backed away from it so fast I stumbled. My heart was hammering hard enough to hurt. I checked around me, expecting someone to be watching from the trees. But there was nothing, just the forest and the road and the fading light. I left. I didn't even get back in the car right away, just stood there shaking until my legs remembered how to move. I didn't stop again until I reached a small town at the base of the mountain. One gas station, one diner, lights buzzing like tired insects. I went into the diner because I needed people around me, needed to hear voices that didn't move in unison. The waitress noticed right away that something was wrong. She poured me coffee without asking and told me I looked like I'd seen a ghost. I told her about the people kneeling on the roadside. I didn't mention the name at first. Her face tightened in a way that made my stomach drop. She asked me where I'd seen them. When I told her the road, she looked toward the kitchen, then back at me, lowered her voice. "Don't stop up there," she said. "Don't slow down, and don't talk to them." I asked who they were. She shook her head. They don't belong to the church. They don't belong to anybody. That's when I told her about the guardrail. She went quiet, took my cup and refilled it even though it was still half full. Her hands were shaking worse than mine had been. They learn names, she said finally. Sometimes they already know them. I asked her how that was possible. She didn't answer, just told me to stay in town for the night, said the roads weren't safe after dark. I should have listened, but fear does strange things to your judgment. All I wanted was distance, miles between me and that mountain. I paid and left, promising myself I wouldn't stop again no matter what. The road back wasn't the same one I came down. It wound through trees and the old cabins set far back from the shoulder. Some of them had lights on, some didn't. I kept my eyes forward. That's when I started hearing it. At first, it sounded like wind through branches. Then I realized it had rhythm, a low murmur, rising and falling together. Words, maybe, or something pretending to be words. I passed a clearing and saw them again. More of them this time. Kneeling in a wide circle around a fire that barely smoked. Their heads were bowed, hands clasped, lips moving together, perfectly in sync. My headlights caught faces I recognized. The smiling man was there, closer now, his eyes locked on me as I passed. His smile was wider this time. I didn't look back. When I reached the highway, relief hit me so hard I almost cried. I drove for hours before stopping, pulled into a rest area just before dawn. I slept in the car with the doors locked and the lights on. I thought it was over. Weeks later, back home, I found dirt on my shoes I couldn't explain. Dark soil packed into the treads, smelling like those woods. I scrubbed them clean and threw them out anyway. Then the mail started. No return address. Just envelopes with my name written carefully on the front. Inside were scraps of paper with phrases written over and over in the same hand. We see you. We remember. Thank you for slowing down. I moved apartments after that, changed my route to work, stopped answering unknown numbers. Sometimes, late at night, I hear murmuring outside my window. Not loud, not close. Just enough to notice if I'm already awake. And every now and then, when I pass a guardrail on a quiet road, I swear I can see fresh marks in the metal. Letters just starting to form, waiting for someone to slow down. It started late, the kind of late that feels like the world has been swallowed whole by darkness. I'd been driving for hours along a stretch of back road that cuts through the Appalachians, a narrow two-lane where trees press in on both sides, their bare branches scratching against the sky like clawed fingers. The kind of road you take when you want to escape, when you need quiet, but I should have known better. It was December, the wind cold enough to bite through layers, and the moon was just a thin sliver above, offering little light. My headlights illuminated the cracked asphalt ahead, reflecting in patches of frost that made the road shimmer like black ice. I remember thinking, as I pressed on, that it was strange how quiet it was. No animals, no wind through the trees, not even the occasional creak of an old sign swinging in the breeze. Nothing but the crunch of my tires and the steady hum of my engine. That's when I noticed it. A pair of headlights behind me, distant at first, but gaining on me in a way that felt deliberate. Not fast, not reckless, just close enough that I could feel it pressing against my back bumper. I checked my mirrors. Nothing unusual, just the road stretching behind me. I assumed it was a semi, one of those big rigs that take forever to pass on these narrow roads. But something about it didn't add up. The headlights stayed steady, unwavering, exactly where they were. I flicked my brights, hoping to signal it, but the lights didn't dip, didn't flash, didn't change at all. It was like someone was riding me, patient, silent, just waiting. The more I tried to ignore it, the closer it seemed to get. The more the road seemed to tighten, like the forest was leaning in to watch. I thought about pulling over early, maybe letting it pass, but every time I considered it, the thought twisted in my gut. This road was lonely. The kind of lonely where, if you break down, no one comes for miles. The snow hadn't fallen yet, but the frost made stopping a gamble. And that's when the headlights, steady, unblinking, started to make me nervous in a way that was physical. My chest tightened, my hands gripped the wheel so hard it hurt. I told myself it was just a trucker, tired, lost in his own rhythm. But even then, I noticed how the lights reflected off the frost in my rear bumper, glinting with a strange, almost deliberate shine, like someone was keeping an eye on me, just behind the glass. I drove like that for nearly an hour. The road twisted, dipped, and climbed through hills that felt older than the country itself, the trees arching over me like cathedral ribs. Every turn made my stomach drop. Every shadow in the forest made me flinch. I didn't dare look behind too long, but every glance in the mirrors confirmed the same thing. Those headlights, riding my tail, unwavering. I tried to shake the feeling, humming along to the radio, telling myself I was imagining it. But it didn't matter how loud I played the music. The lights stayed. Even when I slowed down, they slowed. When I sped up, they sped up. The rhythm was inhumanly perfect, like they were waiting for me to make a mistake. And I felt like I was driving not just for myself, but for something else, too. Something unseen pressing against the night. Finally, I pulled off onto a wide shoulder where the trees retreated a little, hoping to break the tension, hoping to see the truck finally pass me. I parked, cut my engine, and sat there, trying to calm my heartbeat, telling myself I'd waited it out. And for a moment, there was silence. The kind of silence that settles in your ears after a long day of noise, heavy, almost suffocating. Then I noticed the headlights hadn't gone. They were just there, shining on me from the road behind. I squinted through the windshield, expecting to see the familiar shape of a semi. Nothing. Not a cab, not a grill, not a trailer. Just the glow of lights reflected on the wet asphalt and the black shape of the forest behind. I remember thinking it had to be a trick of my eyes, a shadow playing against the frost, maybe even a reflection from my own mirrors. But that thought died when I stepped out of the car. The cold hit me like a wall, my breath clouding in front of me, and I felt it before I saw it, the engine idling, a low, steady hum that vibrated through the ground, right there behind my car. I turned fully, looking over the trunk, and the sight froze my blood. There was no cab, no truck, no semi, just the engine. An impossibility, like the machine was alive, existing without form, humming and waiting. And then I saw the handprints, fresh, smeared across the trunk, black against the frost that had begun to settle there. They were big, too big for me. Fingers splayed as though whoever had touched it had leaned hard on the metal. I swore I hadn't done it. I knew every inch of the car, every smudge, every nick. These weren't mine. They were impossibly fresh. The frost disturbed in a way that meant someone, or something, had pressed against it just moments ago. I stepped back, heart hammering, my skin crawling with the kind of fear that leaves you shaking without knowing why. The engine hummed behind me, steady, patient, and the handprints were all I needed to know that I wasn't alone, that whatever had been behind me for that hour hadn't just been lights. It had been watching, waiting, following. I backed away slowly, trying to convince myself to call for help, but my phone was dead. No signal for miles, like a bubble of isolation had swallowed me whole. I thought about running back into the car, locking the doors, but even as I did, I felt a presence, something vast and patient standing just out of reach in the dark. I could hear the faint crunch of frost under weight, a rhythm so soft I almost convinced myself it was the wind. Almost. My breath came in ragged gasps, my chest tight, my mind racing through every horror story I'd ever laughed off. None of them mattered now. None of them prepared me for the unbearable, unshakable certainty that I had been followed for an hour by something human-shaped, yet impossible to define, and now it had revealed itself in the simplest, cruelest way. Its hands on my car. I wanted to get back on the road, wanted to drive until my eyes bled, but I couldn't. My hands shook too much, my body too frozen with fear. I listened to that engine, humming steadily, idling, as though it were breathing behind me. I felt a weight in the air, like the night itself had thickened, pressing down with expectation. And then, as I finally managed to force my legs to move, I turned back to glance at the trunk. The handprints were gone. Just like that. Vanished. No frost disturbed, no black smudge remaining. And the headlights, still there in the distance, steady, unwavering, blinked out as if nothing had ever happened. I drove on, faster than I thought possible, hands slick on the wheel, my eyes scanning every shadow, every tree line. Nothing followed. The road stretched out empty, the quiet almost comforting, but every mile was filled with the memory of what I'd seen, or not seen, behind me. When I finally reached the lights of a town, I tried to tell myself it was over, that it had been a trick, a hallucination brought on by exhaustion. But even as I parked at a gas station, even as the warmth of fluorescent bulbs washed over me, I knew better. I could still feel the weight of those hands on my car, the pressure of the engine humming just behind me. I could still feel it following, patient, waiting. I never took that road again. Not at night, not ever. Even during the day I avoided it, keeping my distance because the memory of those lights, so steady, so unblinking, and the impossibility of that engine idling without a cab, stayed with me. I've tried to make sense of it, told myself countless times it was a hallucination, exhaustion, some trick of light and frost. But I can't shake the feeling that it's still out there, riding the roads, patient, waiting for someone else to drive too long, too late, and look back just once too often. And sometimes, when I drive on unfamiliar roads or late at night through thick woods, I feel that same pressure at my back. And I know without a doubt that whatever I saw that night is still out there, watching, waiting, patient. I still wake up sometimes, heart pounding, feeling it behind me. A presence that can't be explained, a reminder that some things follow you not for miles, not for hours, but for as long as you're alive, and maybe even after. And when I think about it, the memory doesn't fade, it doesn't ease with time. That hour on the road, the headlights that never blinked, the engine that shouldn't have existed, and those handprints, impossible, undeniable, they are as real to me now as they were then. And somewhere, deep in the hollows of the Appalachians, I know it waits for me. The next person who thinks they're alone on the road, who thinks the night is empty, who dares to glance in the mirror and see lights that never move, and feel the brush of hands on metal that shouldn't be touched. I remember that night like it's etched into my bones, though I wish I could forget it. I'd been driving through the mountains for hours, the sky long since swallowed by the dense, choking darkness of Appalachian ridges. My headlights cut thin streaks through fog that clung to the trees like misted breath. I was tired, my body aching from hours hunched over the wheel, and my mind was somewhere between wakefulness and that hollow, dozing drift where the world seems unreal. I stopped at a little rest area just off the main highway, a wooden shack with peeling paint and a rusted vending machine that hummed louder than anything else in the empty lot. I was about to stretch my legs, maybe pour myself a bad cup of coffee from the machine when I unfolded my old paper map. I hadn't used it in years, mostly relied on my phone, but for some reason, I tucked it into the glove compartment. The map looked ordinary enough at first, yellowed at the folds, edges curling. But then my eyes caught something, a road I didn't remember ever seeing, cutting diagonally across the mountains, connecting two towns I barely knew existed. I remembered folding that part of the map back, or so I thought, but there it was, sprawled in front of me like an invitation. Something about it felt wrong, and yet irresistible, like the mountains themselves were whispering for me to go that way. I debated it for longer than I'd like to admit, and then, almost against my better judgment, I drove. The road was narrow, barely more than a single lane, flanked by dense trees that clawed at the edges of my headlights. Every curve seemed sharper than it should have been, every hill steeper. The fog thickened, heavier than it had been on the highway, and the silence swallowed my engine's hum. I drove slowly, telling myself I'd be out of it soon, that I'd pop back onto the main road, but mile after mile, there were no signs, no markers, no evidence of the shortcut leading anywhere I recognized. It was like the forest had swallowed the world. Every so often, I thought I saw something moving just beyond the trees, but when I blinked, it was gone. Shadows shifting in ways that didn't make sense. Around midnight, I saw a cabin. It was a small thing, low to the ground, with a single light flickering behind a grimy window. I pulled over, more out of relief than curiosity, and stepped out. The air was cold, biting, and smelled faintly of smoke and damp earth. The forest was alive with sounds I couldn't place. Snapping twigs, distant shuffles, low murmurs that might have been animals or something else. I wanted to leave, but I couldn't ignore the map in my hand. The road ended here, or so it seemed, and beyond the cabin, the darkness pressed down in a way that made my chest tight. I approached the cabin slowly. The door was slightly ajar, hanging on rusted hinges. I peeked inside. It was empty, or at least it looked empty. A table, 2 chairs, a fireplace cold and ashen. Nothing stirred. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling I wasn't alone. I spent the night in my car, engine off, seat reclined, but sleep wouldn't come. Every sound made me jump, the crunch of leaves, the moan of the wind, a distant thump that could have been a falling branch or someone moving. I thought about leaving, but every time I tried to turn the key, nothing happened. My phone had no signal. I was trapped by the trees, by the darkness, by the impossible silence that wrapped around the cabin like a living thing. The fog pressed against my windows in thick sheets, and the map, now folded tightly, seemed heavier in my lap. I could feel the mountains pressing in, closer than they should have been, as if they were aware of my presence and quietly amused. Morning came in muted shades of gray, but it brought no relief. The cabin was still there, but everything outside looked different. The road I'd followed so carefully had disappeared, replaced by thick undergrowth and tangled roots. I tried to retrace my path, but the shortcut was gone. The trees looked taller, more oppressive, and the fog hadn't lifted. And then I noticed something that made my stomach turn. The map. The road I had seen the night before, the one that had drawn me into the mountains, was gone, erased as if it had never existed. Even the town I'd aimed to reach now didn't appear. I checked my compass, my GPS, my sense of direction, but nothing made sense. I was somewhere else entirely, somewhere that shouldn't exist on any map I knew. I wandered, hoping to find the main road, but the forest seemed to stretch endlessly. I started noticing other signs, or fragments of them. Footprints that weren't mine, fresh and muddy, winding off into the trees and disappearing. Branches snapped behind me when I stopped, but whenever I turned, nothing was there. Sometimes I caught glimpses of shapes through the fog, a figure at the edge of my vision, hunched, moving oddly, too quick to be human in a normal sense. I couldn't tell if it was watching me or just part of the forest's strange rhythm. My fear grew, but not like in a movie, not sudden spikes of adrenaline. This was a slow, gnawing dread that crawled into my chest and lodged there. I felt the hours stretching like the road itself, pulling me deeper into a wilderness that seemed to exist for no other reason than to trap me. By afternoon, hunger and exhaustion had begun to sap my will. I found a small stream, drank, and tried to rest, but the silence was alive, pressing against me. Every so often, the fog would swirl unnaturally, twisting between trees, and I would swear I could hear murmured voices, sometimes calling my name, sometimes laughing softly, like children at play, though I hadn't seen a soul for hours. I thought about that cabin and the map again, trying to remember why I'd trusted it, why I'd felt compelled to follow a line that hadn't been there before. Something about it had promised safety or direction, but it had been nothing but a lure. The thought made my hands shake, and I cursed myself for ever folding the paper in that way, for ever stopping at that rest area. As night fell again, the forest grew heavier. The shapes I glimpsed became bolder, long, thin shadows slipping between trees, or hunched figures that froze when I tried to stare. I stopped walking, heart hammering, afraid to move, afraid that if I did, I would become part of whatever pattern the mountains were hiding. And then I heard it clearly. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, circling me. I spun in every direction, flashlight cutting beams into the fog, but nothing. The sound of breathing, too, low and uneven, matching my own, except it wasn't mine. It was something out there, something watching, patient. I didn't want to run, because I had no idea where the path lay, but staying still didn't help. I could feel it moving closer, almost smelling the fear clinging to my skin. I whispered to myself, tried to reason it out. Maybe another traveler, lost like me. But the way the air shifted, the way the shadows warped, told me otherwise. I don't know how long I stayed there, crouched behind a tree, listening as the footsteps passed and returned, circling in an impossible pattern. At some point, I heard laughter, or at least I think it was laughter, echoing through the valley, but muffled, like it had traveled miles through roots and stone before reaching me. And then, as suddenly as it began, the noises stopped. Complete silence. The fog thinned slightly, and I dared to lift my head. The forest stretched endlessly, but I noticed something that made my stomach sink. The cabin, the stream, the strange path. I couldn't recognize any of it. Nothing matched the memory of this morning. The map, now crumpled in my hand, was blank. No roads, no lines, no towns, just the yellowed paper, fragile and meaningless. I walked through the night, through days that blurred into each other, following intuition and hope, but I never found the road. I found signs of life occasionally, a faint trail of smoke, a broken fence, footprints, but every time I approached, they vanished. The forest had a rhythm of its own, a cruel, patient logic that ignored my sense of time. I started talking to myself, naming the shadows, bargaining with them, but nothing answered. I realized I couldn't rely on anything familiar, not the map, not the stars, not the sun. All of it seemed wrong, rearranged, like the mountains themselves had decided to rewrite the world around me. Eventually, I stumbled into a clearing that looked almost like a town. Shacks, smoke rising from chimneys, a few figures moving slowly. I called out, but no one answered. The air smelled faintly of wood smoke and something else I couldn't place, metallic and earthy. I stepped forward, and as I did, the fog rolled in again, swallowing the buildings. When I blinked, it was gone. No shacks, no figures, no path forward. Just endless trees, fog, and the same oppressive silence. I realized then that whatever had guided me, whatever the map had promised, had led me somewhere I couldn't leave. I still carry the map sometimes, folded tightly in my pack. It looks ordinary, harmless. But every so often, when the light hits it just right, I swear I can see faint lines where roads used to be. And I feel that same pull, that same whisper in my chest, urging me to follow. And I don't. I can't. Because I know what happens when you do. The shortcut is real in a way no map should be. And the mountains, they never let you go. I don't know where I am. Not really. Some nights I hear footsteps outside my tent. Some nights I see shapes moving just beyond the trees. I tell myself I'm alone, but the forest laughs softly. And I remember the map. And I wonder if I ever really left that cabin at all. It's been weeks, maybe months. Time has no meaning here. All I know is the pull never stops, and the road that shouldn't exist still calls my name. I remember that night like it was carved into my bones, every detail sharp and unwilling to fade. I'd been driving home late, winding through the back roads that cut through the Appalachian foothills, the kind of roads where the trees lean in too close and the darkness feels thick enough to taste. My phone had been dead all day, and when I finally pulled it from my pocket, I realized there wasn't a single bar of signal. I cursed under my breath, thinking about how isolated I'd be if something went wrong. The headlights cut weak paths through the trees, painting long, jittering shadows across the asphalt. I'd been on this road 100 times before, but that night it felt different, like the forest itself was holding its breath. I was just rounding a familiar curve when my phone buzzed violently in my hand. I froze. There was no signal. My eyes darted between the black sky and the screen, the tiny glowing rectangle showing an incoming call. The caller ID read unknown, and my gut tightened. I almost hung up immediately, but something made me answer. A man's voice came through, calm and measured, almost disturbingly so. "Slow down," he said, "before the next curve." I laughed nervously, trying to shake off the chill that had settled over me. "Very funny," I muttered, gripping the wheel tighter. "I know the road. I don't need..." But the line clicked just once. The kind of click that made your stomach twist, and the silence on the other end stretched heavy. I glanced at my speedometer. I wasn't going that fast. I'd driven this stretch countless times in the daytime and never had a problem. My fingers itched to hang up, but I couldn't. There was a strange compulsion to keep listening, even though every rational thought screamed at me to throw the phone across the seat. Then, softly, almost like he was exhaling into the receiver, he spoke again. I said, "Slow down. Right here." I tried to look ahead, scanning the road. But it was just trees, fog creeping low to the ground, and the faint glint of the moon reflecting off the asphalt. Nothing seemed dangerous, but the sound of his voice, it had weight. It was patient, like someone who had been waiting years to tell someone this exact thing. I eased off the gas. My hands shook slightly, and I told myself I was just nervous, that the whole thing was a prank. Some jackass who somehow got my number. But the voice didn't sound like a prank. There was no humor in it, only a steady, almost mournful insistence. "You don't know what's ahead," he said. I laughed again, more out of nervousness than anything else. Okay, I get it. I'm slowing down." A pause, then a sigh. Soft, almost disappointed. That's when my stomach dropped. The guardrail at the edge of the curve was bent inward, as if something or someone had forced itself through it. The metal twisted like it had been pressed by a massive hand, the splintered wood posts shaking slightly with each small tremor of the earth. My headlights caught the twisted curve just in time to jerk my wheel to the right. I slammed the brakes, heart hammering, tires squealing. My hands trembled on the steering wheel. I sat there for what felt like hours, catching my breath, eyes glued to the guardrail, expecting some animal, some shadow. But there was nothing. No footprints, no signs of a vehicle. Just the bent metal and the faint echo of that sigh lingering in my ears. I couldn't move for a moment. My thoughts spun wildly. Who was that? How had he known? I tried to rationalize it. Maybe someone had seen me speeding earlier and tried to warn me. Maybe he'd walked that stretch or was driving ahead and I just hadn't noticed. But none of it made sense. The curve was narrow, the trees tight on either side, and I hadn't seen another car. None. Eventually, I started driving again, slowly, cautiously, keeping my eyes peeled for any sign of another person. The road stretched on, silent except for the low hum of my tires on asphalt and the occasional snap of a branch falling from the trees. The kind of quiet that presses on your chest, makes your breathing feel too loud. I tried to call someone, anyone, to tell them what had happened. The call wouldn't connect. No signal. The air around me seemed thicker now, heavier. Every shadow in the trees looked like it could be hiding something, and every rustle of leaves felt deliberate. That voice stayed with me too, looping in my mind. Calm, patient, almost intimate in its warning. I couldn't shake the feeling that the man was right there somewhere, watching me, waiting for the next curve to test whether I'd obeyed. I tried to rationalize it again. Maybe someone had a scanner, someone who knew the road well enough to see me coming. But even that sounded far-fetched. And the sigh, that was impossible. No scanner could sigh. I passed through the next few miles slowly, the forest seeming to shift subtly around me. Shadows stretched differently. Trees leaned closer. The fog thickened so that my headlights barely cut through it. Every time I rounded another curve, I checked the edges of the road, half expecting the metal to be bent again, half expecting, I don't know what. But the fear wasn't about what I saw. It was the knowledge that I couldn't see what might be there. Then it happened again. My phone buzzed violently in my hand. I yelped, gripping it like it was a live thing. No signal, I muttered. The screen lit up. Another call. The same unknown. I froze. I wanted to throw it out the window, but I answered. "Slow down," the man said again, voice calm, measured. "Here." I swallowed hard, trying to stay rational. I'm going slow. I'm careful." A pause. Then a soft, almost sorrowful sigh. "Not enough." I glanced up just in time to see the guardrail bending inward again, just ahead, but this time it was different. The metal wasn't just twisted. It looked pressed down, pressed by something enormous, something impossibly deliberate. And I swore I saw a figure crouched low behind the curve, shadow blending perfectly with the forest. I slammed the brakes, tires screeching, and the car skidded slightly on the wet asphalt. The figure didn't move, didn't even flinch, just crouched there, waiting. I couldn't make out a face, but the air around it seemed heavy, charged with a quiet, terrifying intent. My heart felt like it had lodged itself in my throat. I wanted to scream, to throw the car into reverse, but my limbs were frozen, my mind looping back to that voice, calm and insistent. I finally forced myself to move, inching past the figure. It didn't follow, didn't even rise to stand, just crouched, watching, as if acknowledging my decision to obey. My phone vibrated again, a warning this time, almost like it was shaking in my hand of its own accord. I dropped it into my lap and pressed the accelerator, fleeing down the winding road as fast as I dared without hitting another curve. By the time I reached a patch of road where the trees thinned and I could see the lights of a distant town, I realized I was shaking uncontrollably. My hands were raw, gripping the wheel, knuckles white. My breathing was ragged, and my mind refused to let go of that voice. Calm, patient, certain. I called my friend as soon as I got a signal, trying to explain what happened. They laughed, suggested sleep deprivation or stress or some trick of my imagination. I wanted to believe that. I wanted to tell myself it had all been a hallucination. But deep down, I knew better. That curve, that guardrail, the way the metal had bent, the impossibility of the timing, it wasn't imagination. It was something else. I haven't driven that road at night since. I take the highway, longer and more exposed, but safer in theory. Yet sometimes, when I'm alone, when the wind is still and the world is dark, I swear I hear the soft click of a phone call coming in. Unknown. And I imagine that calm, measured voice telling me again, as it did that night, slow down. I still dream about that guardrail, bent inward like a warning carved into steel, and the way the shadow crouched just beyond my vision. There's no logic, no closure, just the echo of something patient, something certain, something waiting for you to disobey. And every time I see a curve in the road, I can feel it there, waiting, watching, judging whether I'll heed the warning or whether I'll test the patience of something that knows these back roads far better than I ever could. I don't talk about it much. People would think I'm crazy, and maybe I am. But I know what I saw, I know what I heard, and deep down, I know that some warnings are not meant to be questioned, only obeyed.